Have you ever had the feeling that you try to make changes, you're trying to change habits that aren't helpful for you, aren't productive for you, are actively hurting you, and it just feels like you take one step forward and two steps back? Or if you're trying something new, it goes pretty well for about a week, and then it feels like you just can't get any farther than that and you feel like you failed your goals? Well, I'm here to talk today about a way that might reframe how we see failures when we're trying to change habits, and ways that may be more productive for us in trying to make long-term changes. So I was reminded of this topic when I was talking about Amber Lynn Reid a couple of weeks back. And then people were talking about how they seem to see her going through phases or stages where she starts to be very excited about something that might be a positive change for her, whether it's seeing a new doctor, a new therapist, or latching onto something that might be helpful for her, whether it was in her weight loss journey or her mental health journey or just things like that. And it seemed like she would get really into it for about a week, maybe 2 weeks, and then she would fall off and then be left right where she was before, and people got really disillusioned with the idea that she would ever be able to make any lasting change because they had just seen this pattern repeat so many times. And what that triggered in my mind was that this is very similar to how people feel about a loved one who's struggling with addiction. Now, I'm not saying that Amber Lynn Reid is addicted to anything, but I just thought that the comparison there was very apt for people who have a loved one who is struggling with addiction, who has been told so many times, I'm gonna change, hey, this is the way that I'm gonna do it, I have a plan. They seem very motivated about it, they seem very genuine about it, but then after a couple of weeks, they're right back in the same cycle that they were before. But what if there were a model that changes how we see all of that and gives us a framework for understanding how relapse fits into the change process as a normal part of that process instead of something to be stigmatized or to be ashamed of? So today we're going to be talking about the trans-theoretical model of change. And that's quite a mouthful to say every time, so I'll be referring mostly to the stages of change. So as an overview, this usually goes in line with the concept of motivational interviewing, which is a tool that a lot of addiction counselors, a lot of therapists will use when working with somebody who's struggling with substance use disorders. Now, motivational interviewing is a method of communicating, a way of asking questions and highlighting discrepancies between what somebody's saying and allowing some ambivalence to form in terms of teetering between keeping things the same and moving towards change. And of course, as counselors, we always want our clients to be moving towards change. And so highlighting some of these discrepancies, pushing on that ambivalence through this mode of communicating is a way of allowing our clients to explore, what if I were to change something? Maybe things aren't working as well as I think they are. And now the way that the stages of change fits into that is that it's the model on which motivational interviewing makes sense. The stages of change are a way of conceptualizing how people change. Now, a lot of times we think, okay, well, you just make a decision to change something, and then if you care enough about it, then you'll go and do it. And if you fail, or if you don't make the change that you initially set out to make, then that means you didn't care enough or you didn't have enough willpower. And that's unhelpful because it brings a lot of shame and a lot of guilt into the process of change. And so if you don't keep up with your resolution or the change that you're trying to make, it gets put down as a personality issue, a character flaw, if you will. And so let me talk about what the stages of change are. There are 6 of them, and we start with pre-contemplation. Pre-contemplation is a stage where I don't think that anything's wrong. I don't think that anything needs to change. And so this is where counselors will pull on those discrepancies. Well, you're telling me that things are great about the way that you're doing things, and you're just telling me that yesterday you had this huge argument, or that you have to lie to cover up your substance use, or that you have to come see me every week because you're on probation because of your substance use. Tell me how that is working for you. And the difficult part about this with motivational interviewing is that this can really stray into being sarcastic very easily if you don't have that fundamental unconditional positive regard for a client. If you are not honestly asking and you're just trying to ask the right questions to elicit the right kind of response, this can come off as really sarcastic. But the important thing to highlight about pre-contemplation is that there is going to be a stage where somebody does not recognize that what they're doing is not helpful or is not working for them. And what we're trying to do is highlight the ways that it's not working for them so they can recognize it for themselves, so they can move on to the next stage, which is contemplation, thinking, maybe there is something I could do differently. Maybe there is something that can improve. Maybe there's something that could be better about my current situation. So right now they're just thinking about this. Maybe I'm not satisfied with my weight, for example. Maybe I'm not satisfied with the way that marijuana is working for me. Or maybe I'm not satisfied with this current situation just in general. And then during this phase, what we're trying to do is solidify, okay, what's not working for you? What might we want to change? What might that look like? And then that moves us into the planning or preparation stage. So the preparation stage is getting more specific. These are the things that I want to change. This is the step that I'm going to take to improve the situation that I identified as not working for me in the contemplation stage. And then we move over to action. This is where the plan or the preparation is actually being implemented. So people who follow Amber Lynn Reid, or anyone who's seen someone go through this cycle, will recognize this. They recognize like, hey, that person's identifying something. And initially you think, oh, this is great. Like they're being very proactive, very purposeful about how they're going about it. After a few cycles through this, people start getting disillusioned. Around this point, they say, oh, they're going to do it for like 1 or 2 weeks and then it's going to fall off. Nothing's actually going to change. But this is where you are implementing some of the changes that you're talking about. And then we move into maintenance. Maintenance is just what it sounds like. What are you doing to maintain that change? And this is where it's make or break for a lot of people, where they think like the change journey has to end here. So you've made the change, now just stick with it for the rest of your life and you're gonna be good, right? Then you've made the change. You successfully added a new healthy habit to your life. And that's where a lot of models or the ways that we conceptualize change fall short, because there's actually another category within the stages of change that a lot of people don't like to talk about, and that's considered relapse. And we don't like to talk about relapse as being a normative part of the change process, but it really is. When you're talking about maybe years and years worth of inertia and habits, if I've done something a certain way for 5 years, 10 years, longer than that, then am I going to make a lasting change to that in just 1 or 2 weeks? That's pretty unlikely. It's definitely happened for some of my clients in the past, but more often than not, what we're looking at is that we should expect relapse to happen. If somebody has dealt with their anger in a certain unhealthy way for their entire lives, and then we go in and change a couple of things, change a couple of steps that they take to manage their anger or cope with their feelings of frustration, that might work for a couple of weeks, but then old habits might reassert themselves once in a while. And this is where the paths diverge in terms of how you conceptualize relapse. If you think that's just a sign of failure, that they haven't actually changed fundamentally, then you're going to say like, okay, well, I knew it wasn't going to work. It'd be more likely to give up on them and say they're never actually going to change. And it's very discouraging for the person themselves. If they don't have this framework, they just say, oh, this just confirms that I'm hopeless, or I don't have a chance of improving my life. I'm not actually going to change. Whereas within this model, the stages of change, we can expect relapse. And that's not to say that we encourage it, but more so that, hey, it's not the end of the world that you blew up at your spouse again. It might not feel great, certainly, but we process it. And then so we say, what do we need to do differently next time? How can we improve on this process, on the tools that we're trying to use? And normalizing it. It is a setback for sure. We don't want to diminish that. And it's true, you have not fundamentally changed yet, because you are still establishing a new pattern. You're working against the years and years of practice that you've had in how you manage your anger. And so yes, we're trying a new skill, and it's not going to be solidified overnight. And so we see this play out in a lot of ways when it comes to addiction or substance use disorders, is that when people do relapse, and they do, how do we handle that in our conversations, either with a loved one or with their counselor or somebody that they trust? When they're sharing that, how do we respond? What is our reaction to that? Oh, I knew you couldn't do it. Man, this just confirms my fears that, you're not beyond hope, you're beyond help, that there's not actually any changing for you. And while we might have our own fears ourselves for our loved ones in terms of having that kind of conversation, what we communicate to that person, especially if I'm the counselor for that person, can be devastating in terms of how they are seeing it. And so it's so important when I'm working with somebody who is trying to build a new behavior pattern or someone who is struggling with addiction, I am always thankful to them and express that out loud, that, hey, I'm glad that you shared that with me. Thank you for sharing that with me. I know it's hard to feel so discouraged when you've been trying to make positive changes for yourself, whether this is their first relapse or their 50th. because that's a very vulnerable thing to share. To share that you might not be fully in control of yourself, that's really scary for anybody in our culture to be able to admit. And so then within this stages of change model, relapse becomes less of a frustration than it becomes an opportunity to move back through pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, and then action, and then maintenance again. The difficulty is that when we start feeling shame or stigma or guilt about our relapse, it actually tends to prolong the time that we spend in relapse and in pre-contemplation. If I keep telling myself, well, I'm never actually going to change, I'm just a terrible person, I have no self-control, then it's more likely that I'll succumb to more of that old pattern, whether it's addiction, whether it's anger, whether it's whatever other behavior I'm trying to change in the first place. And it keeps me stuck in pre-contemplation, not because I don't know that it's a problem, but now because I feel like there's nothing I can actually do about it, so why even bother? So what this is really helpful for is helping us to accept that relapse is a normative part of the process, and so we can move back through the pre-contemplation stage quicker than we would otherwise, moving back into contemplation and preparation especially. How do I evaluate what happened? What didn't work about what I was trying to do? And how can I alter that or change that in order to improve this process in the future? How can I better solidify the changes that I'm trying to make? And the important thing to remember in this, and this is what I remind all of my clients, and it's kind of cliche, but it's true, that progress is not linear. We want our progress to be like a straight diagonal line moving up. As I go through counseling, as I try to make changes, there are no setbacks, I just go straight up. I don't even know if I'm pointing in the right direction. But what I have to constantly remind my clients and remind myself as I'm working with these clients is that there are setbacks just naturally in the process, that I might move forward some, backslide some, move forward some, backslide some. And some backslides are bigger or smaller than others. But the point is that if we get stuck in one of those valleys, then that makes it harder for us to progress because we've told ourselves that there's no point in making those changes because I am unable to make those changes. So what I do remind my clients a lot is that what we're trying to do is lengthen the gap of time between relapses. It's not that I expect you to never relapse again. I hope that for you. For your sake, I hope that's the case. But we're just trying to have a longer time between relapses each time, and then have a shorter gap in between our relapse and our contemplation and preparation stages. So shortening the amount of time that we spend wallowing in the guilt and the shame and the stigma of relapsing, which might lead us to binging more in our addiction, or feeling worse about ourselves, or discouraging ourselves from even trying again. So if we shorten that gap of time to moving forward to, okay, we've got to figure out what's going to work better this time. What do I need to do differently? Then that's our strategy for long-term success in terms of making any kind of habit change. And I know, like I said, this model starts primarily with addiction, but it's applicable across a wide range of behaviors and pattern changes. So that's why I'm so appreciative of having this model, having the training in motivational interviewing and the stages of change, because it just serves the counseling process so well that there's not a place for frustration with a client who just can't seem to get it. It just means that they're working on changing their patterns, and the changes that we're trying to implement aren't quite solid yet. And it doesn't expect perfection from clients. It expects that there is going to be some relapse. There are going to be setbacks. And what we're trying to do is just lengthen the time between relapses. And then when they do happen, to be able to process and move on to making further changes sooner rather than later. So it's a very pragmatic kind of view of change, and I think it's more realistic than what we normally expect of people, especially after we've been burned so many times by a loved one saying they're going to kick a habit or they're going to quit a certain drug. So going back to the original conversation that started this whole idea of a video, is that yes, I get why people would be so disillusioned with Amber Lynn Reid because of the vast history of what she's talked about in terms of weight loss or changes in her relationships or changes in her own mental well-being, that people feel like it's very easy to give up on her. So I hope this is a way to inform that conversation, as well as other conversations and ways that we might think about change in our loved ones and the people that we care for and the people that we follow or watch on YouTube or whatever other social media. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Please do like and subscribe, that helps the channel to grow. And I'm so encouraged to be able to talk about concepts like this that span mental health, but are just about change in general, and how we're always striving to make changes, even if it's not within a clinical setting or with problems that rise to a clinical degree, but how important this attitude and mindset shift is for anyone trying to improve their lives. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all next time.